Welcome to our first series on JavaScript programming language, and welcome on board. Let's just have this journey with practicals, with passion, and everything that entails. Let's all try understand what JavaScript is all about. Now, when it comes to JavaScript, we all know that we have programming languages. And when it comes to programming languages, we normally refer them to as standalone languages because you have to use that particular language to make an application, to develop an application. And actually, JavaScript is actually one of the programming language. Now, in essence, when it comes to JavaScript, based on the documentation and of course the course outline that we're going to follow, as a matter of introduction, we can actually refer JavaScript as a lightweight interpreted programming languages. It is actually commonly used to create dynamic and interactive elements in web applications. So in this particular scenario, if you have more knowledge or you have knowledge on HTML and CSS, then that forms the basic fundamental for you to learn JavaScript. So because one, with HTML and CSS, you're able to create apps, especially the web applications, such as the websites. And that is actually like the foundation for you to understand and learn JavaScript. So as I said, it's a lightweight interpreted programming languages because one, when it comes to websites, you need to make websites more interactive. You want to make websites more dynamic. So if you want to perform such features or to have such features on your website, then automatically you should invest more time on understanding JavaScript. So JavaScript is a very easy to implement because one, it is integrated with HTML. That is one simple thing about JavaScript. It is actually an open and cross platform. So that is another characteristics of a JavaScript. So when it comes to JavaScript, remember as a beginner, you have to understand some concepts. But of course, as you move towards becoming an expert, then you will still rely on the basic things because it's actually the basic things in a language that makes up that particular language. So you'll find that in JavaScript, we had a wide view of what to learn, and based on the course outline, we are going to work step by step in ensuring that we do that particular course outline to the end. We stick to that course outline to the end. But remember, along the line, there are some, for example, common things that cuts across all programming languages. For example, you have operators. That means you have to use or to understand JavaScript operators. You have to understand JavaScript control flows. You have to understand JavaScript functions. You have to understand JavaScript comparisons. You have to understand JavaScript objects. You see, you have to understand JavaScript variables. You have to understand JavaScript events. You also need to understand probably the OOPs in JavaScript and the rest. But this particular topic or this particular part one of JavaScript is going to form a very fundamental basic explanation of what JavaScript is all about. Probably I can just attest one thing. Why do we need to learn JavaScript? Why learn JavaScript in the first place? You see, for you to become a great software engineer, for you to master the art of web development, at some point you need to understand JavaScript. So when we talk about why learn JavaScript, it's more of what is the importance of JavaScript, in other words. You see, JavaScript is actually one of the most popular programming languages we have currently. And we can say it's one of the programmers' great choice. Number two, JavaScript is actually helps you to create really beautiful and crazy fast websites. And you will end up having a lot of advantages, like going to, having JavaScript or JavaScript is actually heavily used because due to its high demand. And when you look at the market, of course, you can end up even specializing on JavaScript until you become a JavaScript engineer. And you see JavaScript again is all over, especially when it comes to Google companies, the Microsoft, the LinkedIn, all those are just about JavaScript. So if you go and understand JavaScript history, then you will end up understanding why is JavaScript so beneficial. Now, there are some things I want to stick by in our first session here. For example, there are some things we want to discuss here. Already I've covered the first one. But you see, there's also a similar thing which is somehow related to that JavaScript. Like, for example, when it comes to the differences, between JavaScript and AJAX. You've heard of JavaScript, you've heard of AJAX. Or later on, you will interact with what is JavaScript and what is AJAX. So you'll find that when it comes to trying to define what JavaScript is all about, apart from being it a lightweight interpreted programming language, you can also define it in a low note. And if you're to define it, probably I can just give us brief definition here, although we are more into practical compared to the theoretical part. You can actually say is a high level interpreted programming language, primarily used for building dynamic and interactive, don't forget that, an interactive web applications, So it is actually one application or one language which was initially referred to as the live script. It was actually initially referred to as the live script. That was the name, the initial name before it becomes JavaScript. So you'll find that, yes, the name JavaScript came later on because initially it was live script and then it was renamed later as JavaScript. So you'll find that if you look at the current name, which is Java, JavaScript, of course, comes from the word. We have Java that now has replaced live. And it was actually, there was a need for JavaScript to ride the wave of popularity, which was more developed by Java. And despite the similar naming, JavaScript and Java are distinct languages with different purposes and syntax. So you cannot say that Java is JavaScript or JavaScript is Java. Those are two totally different languages, and each one has a different purpose and has a different syntax. So JavaScript itself, which we are actually learning, is a versatile language that can be used both on the client side, which is more in web browsers because we are more into web development, and it can also be implemented on the server side. And JavaScript being on the server side will actually help platforms like, especially when you're using Node.js. You see, you can run JavaScript using Node.js. You can run JavaScript just from the web or from the client side. And it is actually well known for its flexibility because it allows developers to manipulate web page content. So there are some of the, let's say, functionalities of a JavaScript, like one, manipulation of web page content. Number two, like you can also use JavaScript to respond to user actions. You can also use JavaScript to create interactive features. And probably you can also use JavaScript to communicate with servers asynchronously, because you see, you can also understand the concept of synchronous and asynchronous JavaScript. So for you to use JavaScript, it can actually communicate with the backend of the application, which of course is being relayed by the Node.js the servers and synchronously. So you'll find that we have some features of JavaScript because we will be interacting with it. One is actually the interactivity of a JavaScript, which is more important because that enables developers to create interactive elements on web pages. And that is why, even on the definition, you can see that it's a high-level interpreted programming language primarily used for building dynamic and interactive web applications. So interactivity is actually one of the characteristics. We also have what you call asynchronous or asynchronicity. And when it comes to that, we are talking about asynchronous programming. When it comes to asynchronous programming, this means that it's a program or a programming that allows tasks to be executed independently without blocking the main execution thread. So actually, JavaScript is one of that. JavaScript is one of that it has a feature of asynchronous programming that it supports or it allows a task to be executed independently without blocking the main execution thread. Another one is what we call, it supports what we call the DOM manipulation. DOM, D-O-M, actually is something that stands for Document Object Model. And this is actually one of the interaction of JavaScript. And when it comes to the document object model, which is actually what you call DOM. And for this scenario, for DOM, this actually stands for D for document, O for object, and then M for model. So we have what you call the document object model, and this, of course, of web pages. So when in JavaScript, when we have this issue or DOM manipulation, because the main feature of the characteristic is actually what you call the DOM manipulation. But of course, DOM itself stands for document object model. Now, this actually allows developers to manipulate or allows developers to modify the structure, the content, and style of HTML and HTML elements. So the issue of manipulation, web elements or web page elements, then automatically that becomes the DOM manipulation, which is actually one of the characteristics. It can also handle event. So that is JavaScript, which can also end up handling events. And when it comes to events, we have, for example, the event-driven programming, where code is executed in response to user actions. Why? Or on watch note, for example, when you have a button and you click on it, and then it gives you like a pop-up window, that automatically is an event. And we have other events, for example, the page loader, the timer expirations. Those are some of the small things that JavaScript can actually do. But you see, JavaScript can be used in a wider view. Probably the last one I can talk about is JavaScript being a cross-platform compatibility. That JavaScript can run or runs on various platforms and browsers, making it a versatile choice for web development. So in overall, JavaScript plays a pivotal role in modern web development. And this actually empowers you and me as developers to create rich, interactive, and responsive web applications. So if you take a note of, let's say, an introduction to a subject, introduction to a topic, introduction to a unit, if you take it more seriously, a lot of things resides there. A lot of things are taken into account. And those things are there to ensure that you understand the other part of a language. So that is about the JavaScript. Now, you will come across this other one called AJAX. You will come across this other one called AJAX. We call that one, let me come to two. When it comes to AJAX, AJAX stands for what? So AJAX, as the word itself, This actually stands for asynchronous. Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Remember, we also have something called the XML language. So sometimes you need to explore and even try to understand the XML. It's more similar to HTML, but this one is more of an extensible markup language. So what is AJAX? So AJAX, we need to know that at least to define what AJAX is all about. So this one is a technique. It's a technique used in web development. It's a technique used in web development to create asynchronous. Remember, we are talking about the flexibility of executing a file without interfering with the main thread. So asynchronous of applications. Now, you see, for this, that is the definition. Now, it allows web pages, because here we are talking about the web pages, to send what? To send and receive data from the server. Remember, we are talking about both the client side and the server side. So we are talking about receive from the server, asynchronous. Let me just use this term. Synchronously without interfering with the display, without interfering with the display and behavior of existing web page. Yeah, the existing web page. Yeah. So this is actually like two definitions that tends to differentiate between JavaScript and AJAX. Now, remember some of the key components we discussed about JavaScript, or some of the features that make up JavaScript. So what are the characteristics of AJAX? One is actually the synchronous communication. Remember, this is actually the ability. The ability to allow a web page to send and receive data from the server. But remember, again, it is the same characteristics that is depicted on the JavaScript. So we can say that asynchronous communication is somehow related. And if you look at the AJAX, it's more related to the issue of asynchronous compared to the actual JavaScript. So again, we also have, in AJAX, we also have a characteristics of JavaScript, because you see, JavaScript is actually used to initiate AJAX requests and handle server responses. So without JavaScript, again, AJAX is not able to send and receive requests, or kind of initiate AJAX requests or its requests and handle responses coming from the server. And yeah, it's more of a server-side technology. It's more of a server-side technology, and that is actually AJAX. Now, that brings us to this other part, like the development flow. Now, when it comes to the development flow, it's more of what are kind of the workflow that should be followed when of course using JavaScript. And what do we mean by the development workflow? Because you see, for any particular technology, you must have the workflow. For you to use it, you must have a workflow. So the development workflow here refers to the process. Now, this is what I use, but my point here on the development workflow, I'm referring to the process or sequence of steps to be followed by you and me as developers that help us build and deploy software applications or deploy the software applications as far as JavaScript is concerned. But remember, for any programming languages, you can actually have that workflow. And this actually typically includes steps such as you need to know how to plan, you need how to code, you need to know how to test, you need also to know how to debug. Because here, we are talking about the lightweight integrated programming language. So whenever an issue arises, you must understand or you must know how to debug, you must know how to test, and you must know actually the deployment. So it's more like a circle. If you remember, there's a unit or there's something called the software development lifecycle. So on the development workflow, I think that is the best thing to talk about here. So you'll find that in JavaScript development, if we are to narrow it down to JavaScript, because if again you're to talk about the development workflow, it can be a wide topic, but just to know the workflow, just understand the SDLA, that is the software development life cycle, that is SDLC, not SDLA. So in JavaScript development, you will interact with tools such as the version control systems. That is, for example, the Git that we've done before. And I think we're going to do like a step-by-step, tutorial on that, on Git. So in JavaScript development, you must also interact or know how to interact with the version control. You must also use some code editors, like for example, the Sublime Text, the Visual Studio Code. For my case, I'm using the Sublime Text, but whatever thing you're doing, you can transition it into the Visual Studio Code. You can also use, for example, kind of other tools that can allow or that can improve, kind of streamline the workflow and improve productivity. Because at the end, you need to understand the language, use the language to create applications, ensure that the applications are good even before production. So probably that is more of a kind of explanation. Let's come to number 4, which is still kind of a theoretical thing, because we are talking about selecting the right tools. Now, this does not only stick to the JavaScript alone, but it goes beyond the JavaScript. If, for example, tomorrow you are tasked to work on a Python project or even a React project, you see, you have to understand the right tools for the job. So JavaScript actually offers a wide range of tools and libraries for various tasks. For example, if you want to do a front-end development, if you want to do a back-end development, if you want to do a testing, if you want to do the deployment of the JavaScript applications, you have to choose the right tools. So actually, choosing the right tools depends on factors. For example, the project requirements, the team expertise, the scalability, performance goals. So those are the things that can be included in selecting the right tools for the job. Now, for example, if I end up tasking you to develop a web application, you see, you have the front end, you have the back end. And there's also a point where you need to do the testing. After you're through with the application, there's also a point where you need to do the deployment. But assume that you're using a JavaScript application, or you want to do a JavaScript, like front-end development using JavaScript. Now, you'll find that if you're doing the front-end development using JavaScript, there are some popular tools that include some frameworks. You'll be talking about the frameworks. For example, the React framework, the Vue framework, the Angular frameworks. And if you're to go to the backend development, you will end up using, for example, the Node.js, the Express.js, the Net.js, which are commonly used. And you will end up using a lot of others because those are not only but few selected. Those are just but few mentioned or few that I have mentioned. So you need to understand the right tools. So sometimes you can be asked which application are you using for the front end. So you don't go directly like I used HTML. You must be sure, because some been even asked to like which application or which language have you used on your front end, or which technology have you used on the front end. Somebody is going to like CSS alone. Probably somebody else is going also for like Node.js. You must understand. If you look at the JavaScript, if as long as you're using what you call JavaScript framework, you'll be able to tell us that I'm using, let's say, React, I'm using Vue, I'm using Angular. Those are for the front-end development frameworks, JavaScript frameworks. If you're going for the back-end, we have the Node.js, we have the Express.js. Also, you have like the Nest.js. Now, so that is about selecting the right tools. Remember, this is a good introduction I'm trying to lay out before we do the implementation. Now, there's what we call just enough HTML. What does this mean? Or what does it mean when it comes to just enough HTML CSS? Now, when I talk about just enough CSS, JavaScript is always used in conjunction with HTML and CSS. Now, in which mode? In building or just to build interactive and visually appealing web applications. So remember, in the first place, it's more of a prerequisite or a requirement for you to learn JavaScript. So we always say that if you want to understand JavaScript, then you should have a good knowledge on HTML, CSS, because we must integrate. There's a conjunction between, or there's a relationship between using the JavaScript and the HTML, CSS. So you must come from the perspective on an HTML, CSS before you get into using JavaScript. Or for you to be in a better position to understand JavaScript, then you can ensure you have a knowledge of HTML and CSS. So JavaScript actually handles, now, if you look at it, while JavaScript handles the application's logic and dynamic behavior, then the HTML applications provides, or the HTML language provides the structure, and the CSS provides the styling. Look at how the correlation comes from. So it's actually the JavaScript that provides what we call the logic and dynamic behavior. So when you go to the website, the structure of a website or a web page is actually HTML. The styling part is the CSS. And if at all we have some dynamic behaviors appearing on the page and the logic, that is automatically JavaScript. So it's essential for JavaScript developers to have a basic understanding of HTML and CSS, as I had said, for you to manipulate what we call the document object model effectively, which is actually one of the characteristics of a JavaScript. And if the document object model is effectively manipulated, then you will end up creating a user-friendly interfaces which are more attractive and more appealing. So it is a requirement for you to go through that. Number 6, let's come now to the practical part. We have what we call the understanding objects, but remember, this is more like an intro. But at the end, I'm going to do 1 or 2 projects just to relay or to kind of introduce us into some of these concepts. So you see, you need to understand what is an object. So an object in JavaScript are one of the fundamental data types. So probably you've come across other languages and you've come across the word data type. So in JavaScript, objects in itself is actually more of a data type. It's actually a fundamental data type. And these data types, or what you call the objects in JavaScript, are actually used to store collections of key value pairs. So just to know, it's more of keeping, or it's more of a storage. Objects actually can represent a real world entities, enough properties and methods. And these properties and methods sometimes are associated with with these entities. So when you understand the objects, it's actually a crucial stage in becoming a JavaScript developer. So it is so important. It is so important for you to take note of and ensure that whatever information that whatever objects you're using, let it be linked to the type of data, to the type of objects you are actually storing. So we have that as actually objects, and probably objects or JavaScript objects are also used to model. Let me talk of modeling data structures, or you're modeling complex data structures. You can use to organize your code. You can also implement object-oriented programming concepts. Remember the OOP. We will come into that just to understand the OOP. Now, there are two things you need to take note when it comes to understanding a programming languages. And these are actually what people say that if you understand, or if you get to understand the two concepts, you'll be in a better position. Number one is the object-oriented programming. What is the OOP? What is included in as far as the OOP of that particular language is concerned? And another one is the data structures, the data structure of a language. Understand the data structure, how the language is laid out. Those are the things that will make you a good programmer. And number 7 here, we are talking about the understanding of variables. So when it comes to understanding variables, variables used to store data values in JavaScript. Now, what is the difference between the JavaScript objects and JavaScript variables? Remember, in JavaScript objects, we talked of a data type. We talked of a fundamental data type that is actually used to store collections, key value, pairs. But here on variables, we are also talking about that it's more of a container that is actually used to store data values. So this time down is data values, or variables are used to store data values. Objects are actually used to store collections of key value pairs, But now, for you to declare a variables, you have to use, initially we have two keywords. We have let and we have const. Sometimes we also have the var. So these are keywords that can be used to all the different types of data. For example, the types of data, for example, you can talk of numbers, you can talk of strings, you can talk of, let's say, booleans. You can talk of the same objects, remember, you can talk of the same objects. And yeah, so when it comes to using, especially when you use variables, you can actually use variables to store this information. And of course, objects, you can also store functions. In fact, these are the most interesting part of using JavaScript. But now we have the let, we have the const, we have the var. These are reserved keywords, the JavaScript reserved keywords, which are held or which are actually within the JavaScript data dictionary. So you will find that for you to understand variables or understanding variables, this involves knowing how to declare, how to initialize, how to update, and how to scope variables with the JavaScript program. So this is actually the practical part. And variables play a vital role in storing and manipulating data, controlling program flow, and making code more readable and maintainable. So actually, JavaScript variables are very important. JavaScript variables are very, very important. So you must know, practically, we'll come back to that. Number 8 here, we have comparisons or understanding JavaScript comparisons. And when it comes to understanding comparisons in JavaScript, just like any other programming languages, you will have comparison operators or you will have operators. Let's make it on a bigger note. You have what you call operators. So operator is actually a symbol that performs an operation on one or more operands, such as variables or values. And of course, if it's going to perform an operation on one or more operands, then we expect to have what you call a result. So in this scenario, when you have, let's say you have 10 plus 6, this one equals to 16. Now, this is what you call operands. This is what you call operands. Those what you call the operands. This, of course, is the result. But what is in between here is what you call the comparison operator, or is what you call the operator, because this time around you're using an operator. But remember, when it comes to understanding the comparison operators, in JavaScript, it's more of comparisons being used to evaluate conditions and make decisions based on the result. So it's more of evaluating conditions because you have this condition A, then condition B. And at the same time, it's based, or it's actually there to make decisions based on the result given. So JavaScript provides various comparison operators. For example, you can talk about arithmetic operators. You can talk about comparison operators. You can talk about logical or relational operators. But remember, when it comes to understanding comparison, it's more of a one. So if I get rid of, let's say, understanding operators or JavaScript operators, then I think we are on the same page. Because when it comes to the types, we have, for example, arithmetic operators. Arithmetic operators. We have comparison operators. Comparison operators. We have, let me just do like logic or logical operators, and so many others. Let me just mention but few operators. We also have like assignment operator. So these are some of the things you must understand. Assignment operators. We also have like, bitwise operators. So these are some of the things that you must understand when it comes to this, comparison operators. So you have various operators. When you break them, like for example, when you go to arithmetic operators, you can break them. You have different examples. When you go to comparison operators, you have different examples. But remember this one, when it comes to comparison operators specifically, these are actually used to evaluate conditions. For example, the less than, greater than, you see, greater or equals to, less or equals to, not equal to, identical. Those are the comparison operators. And we will be able to dig more on this, the arithmetic operators and the rest. Now, number 10, as part of laying the foundation to us starting the JavaScript. We are talking about writing your first script. We're talking about you writing your first script. So when you're writing your first script, you must know which tools should be included or should be used. Remember, we had talked about a unit, like, okay, one of the subject here, on selecting the right tools for the job. So when it comes to you writing your first script, JavaScript code is what you're supposed to implement, to be implemented. So JavaScript code can be written directly within HTML documents or in a separate JavaScript files with an extension .js. So in this scenario, you can actually have the JavaScript in an HTML file. For example, let's have, for example, a file called index.html. So it means that you can integrate JavaScript here in this HTML file. Or number two, you can also use what you call the external JavaScript file, which of course normally it ends with JS. So e.g. you can have something like java.js. That is a JavaScript. That is a JavaScript file. Just the same way you have the external CSS. So JS is an extension, it's a JavaScript extension. So when you're writing it, at some point, you must be expected to run the code. And I think I'm going to show you using some of the internal, but just to know when you're writing your first script, assume that I have the HTML here, I have the head here, and then the closing head. And then in between here, I have, okay, in between here, I have title. I have title. And then here I have body. Here I have body. And then here I have the HTML. So remember, this is like the HTML file. This is the HTML. This is the HTML file. So this one I can call it index.html. So let's have something like that. So because it's a basic HTML, we are talking about when writing your first script, you can actually use the HTML file to embed a JavaScript file, or you can still use an external JS. So this time around, we have an external JS called java.js. Now, this name Java is just a name. You can change it to a name, or to your name, or a name that suits you. But as long as it has an extension .js, that is how the system will identify that particular file. Now, when you want to write, let's say, for example, your first code, you need to have like script, because this is the only element that the system will know that you're using a JavaScript file. So, for example, there are rules governing each language. If at all you want to execute, assume that you want to write hello world, because that is just a name, or you want to display it, you can just use what you call console.log. Into bracket, you can have the double quotes, and you can have something like hello world. You can have something like that, hello world. So this is actually your first script. When writing your first script, and if you're using the JavaScript, then this is how, if you're using the HTML file to embed that JavaScript, then this is how you can do it. Now, the second thing you can do is when you have an external file, for example, you have java.js. So when you have a file, let's say java.js, when you have a file like java.js, how do you go about it? So when writing JavaScript, or using the console just to run your first JavaScript, remember we also have like two ways. You can actually use this console.log, or you can also use document.write into bracket. Then you have the same thing here. can also have the same thing there. So when using JavaScript or java.js, you can still bring the two icons here. So this time around, let me assume this is index, and let me copy the same thing. So this is when you're using HTML to embed JavaScript. But let me come down here. Let me have another one. Let me call this one about. So it's a separate file. And this time around, I don't want to have this. I only need to have like that. Like that. And then I have my java.js. I can actually paste it here. So this is an external file. It is an external file. So java.js will contain this, like console.log. So if I take one, because if you look at it, you can either use console.log or you can use document.write. So if I get rid of one, assume that we have console.log. So if you want to connect the two files, you want to connect about.html and java.js, you have to have this script element in about.html. So what you do is just come here and type source equals to like that, and then you can talk of java.js. So you've connected the two files. You've connected the two files. So that is how you can actually write your first script, either by embedding JavaScript in the index.html file, HTML file, or you can also use an external JavaScript file with an extension .js. Now let's come to number 11. Let's come to number 11. Now, what is the difference? Like you have internal CSS versus external CSS. So this point is well explained up there on point number 10, that JavaScript code can be included in HTML documents, either internally, that is within the script. This is what we call internally, but remember here, this is what I refer to as internally. So you are including that JavaScript code within the HTML. And it's within the script tags or within the script element. Or you can also do the external by linking to an external JavaScript file. So this one is an external JavaScript file, but here I am doing what you call the linking. So I'm linking the JavaScript here. I'm linking the JavaScript there. So when it comes to that, you'll find that you can use the console. You see, you can use the console.log just to print out the output or to get the output of a JavaScript. Or you can also use the document.write just to get the output. So you have the internal and the external. Now, number 12. When it comes to using what you call the comments in JavaScript. So comments are everywhere. For example, whenever you talk about language, you must speak of a comment. So comments are used to add explanatory notes within JavaScript code. But this is based on JavaScript. But comments, again, can be used to add explanatory notes within that particular programming language. Whether you're using HTML, CSS, there was a way on how to add comments. So those comments were not part of execution. They were actually there as part of the explanatory notes because you have to explain like what your code is doing. So comments are ignored during execution, and even by based on JavaScript, comments are also ignored by the JavaScript interpreter, and they are not executed. So they are not part of the executable outcome. So they are there, apart from being that comments add explanatory notes, they are also used for documenting code and making it more understandable. So when it comes to JavaScript, there are actually two types. And not only JavaScript, it can happen in any other language where you have what you call the single line comments and multi-line comments. So when you have, for example, you have this line like hello world. And then you have this other one called hello. Let's have like hello Mike. I'm here to talk about JavaScript. I'm here to talk about JavaScript. So if you look at this, this is what you call the single line. So I want to show you how to use single line comment. So in JavaScript, when you do like this on that line, it's going to deactivate this line. So it's going to form part of a single line comment. So this is what you call there. When you use the double slashes, the double forward slashes, this becomes what you call, it becomes what you call the single line JavaScript comment. But when it comes to the multi-line, because if you look at this, there are more than one. It's more of a sentence, but it's broken into more than one. So what you do, you have to use one single forward slash, then star, and then go beyond there, use a star, then forward slash. So you can talk of hello, Mike, I'm here to talk about JavaScript. So this is what you call the multi-line. And this is what you call the single line. So we have the single line comments. That is the single line comment. And then here we have what you call the multi-line comments. The multi-line comments. So you see, some of these things are very important. You see, once we start implementing or doing the practical part of JavaScript, you'll actually see the importance of this fundamental or this foundation, which I call it JavaScript part 1, because it's actually more of I attached more of importance, because for you to understand, you have to go out by the concept. Now, there's something, the last thing about using the NoScript tag in HTML. Now, what do we mean by NoScript? There's this tag called NoScript. Now, you've seen me using this script, but we have again what you call NoScript. So it is a tag. It is a tag because at the end of the day, you will have the same NoScript. This one again, you will have /script. So NoScript, script. Now, when we talk about the NoScript tag, even from the word NoScript, so it means that no JavaScript. So NoScript tag is actually used to provide alternative content to users who have disabled JavaScript in their browsers, or whose browsers do not support JavaScript. So because they have the content, yes, but the browser does not support JavaScript, either by disabling it or even the browser itself does not support JavaScript. So the content within the NoScript, because what happens, the content will always come in between. The content will always, for example, if I do console.log into this and say, welcome to Kenya. Welcome to Kenya. You see already I have some content. So this is what you call the content. So the content within the NoScript tag is displayed if JavaScript is disabled or not supported. It's displayed if not supported or not supported. So you'll find that here we are talking about the NoScript. the NoScript. But you see, one funny thing here is this. Apart from using alone the NoScript, you see it's a script. So you have to come here again and use what you call the script. So this one I'm going to push it. This one I'm going to copy and then bring it there, and then one step and be like that for the closing. So this is what you call the NoScript. So if the browser is disabled or the browser does not, let's say if the JavaScript in your browser is disabled, or if your browser does not support the script, then automatically it will display by using the NoScript. So by default, you'll find that we've actually discussed a lot more things, but this is actually a good entry point for us to understand what a JavaScript is all about. So for this particular part, probably I'll stop for part 1, and then we will meet on part 2 of JavaScript continuation. Now, based on the course outline, let's take as part of the course outline, because that is how we will end up understanding some of these concepts. So thank you and see you on the next video.